I have an opinion about what sort of happened with Skulljacker and how it helped me to learn a bit about how to approach these sorts of things. Because
was it the second thing that we worked on together after Gaslands?
Basically, well, it was sort of there was a day when you sort of said there is this thing, A Billion Suns, and then you basically didn't mention it for a year. And somewhere around consecutive, it ran maybe sort of parallel, you came to me with this sort of half-formed idea of Skulljacker, and I absolutely assaulted it. And horribly put you off the whole idea of it. And
so, hi guys. Welcome to Rule of Carnage, a series of conversations between me, Mike Hutchinson, and Glenn Ford, that guy there. We both design and develop games quite often together. And last time we spoke, we were talking about our history of collaboration and collaborating together. And we'll probably talk, I think, a little bit more formally about what some of the sort of tips and best ways to approach collaborating together on a games design are. But as you maybe intimated from that introduction there, we had a lovely time working on Gaslands together, and then shortly after working on Gaslands together, I, as I often do, was just tinkering with another game project. It was something called Skulljacker, which was intended as a sort of cyberpunk skirmish game, very particularly inspired by Bullfrog's Syndicate video game, where you have 4 like agents and you upgrade them with increasingly complicated bits of tech and robot limbs, and you run around with flamethrowers, and there's civilians clogging up your missions, your black op and wet op missions. So shortly after working on Gaslands together, I sort of showed Skulljacker to Glenn, and the like, to cut to the punchline, the experience of working together on Skulljacker killed Skulljacker dead, and it's never returned. So it never got finished. It lies languishing in state, probably never to be returned to. So I guess we started with your position, your point of view last time. Let's maybe do that again. So so you were just starting to unpack that. What's your memory of kind of how we got working together on Skulljacker?
So I think the thing with Skulljacker is that there were two parts of the game that I had the opportunity to respond on. And one of them I should have focused on and gone into that, and sort of, I think if I'd run with that and put my energies into that, it could have, not been sort of suffocated in its crib. And the other one I got very excited about and absolutely went mental on, and horrified at you to such a degree that I think sort of that it just became so distasteful to you that you sort of, from my perspective, that's what it seemed like to me. So to me, so you presented Skulljacker, and we played a game of Skulljacker, and one of the things about it was that there were these civilians milling around, because one of the things about Syndicate is that the Bullfrog game is that you sort of you upgrade your agents with cyber implants until they become like gods among men, just floating around destroying entire buildings with a look. And one of the other things was that it was an early real-time strategy game to have loads of civilians milling around, and if you did things in a certain way, you could use those civilians to your benefit, or they could be a huge, pain. And that idea of being able to herd the civilians about to cause problems for your opponent, or just trying to scatter them, or sort of triggering the intervention of like security forces, that is still the thing that I really love the idea of, and I would love us to go back to that in some form or another. It's a hard sell, because you ask people to get like 4 minis that they're controlling and 20 minis that are just like scenery, and I think that was one of the sort of the tricky points about it. And what I wish I'd done, and what I probably should have done, is focus on the mechanics of how they could work, and figuring out a way. I think one of the problems is that I don't think back then I could have reached a point of elegance with that process that would be necessary that I think I could do now. One of the other parts of Syndicate, and obviously what would then obviously be one of the other parts of Skulljacker, is that you get these cybernetic upgrades. And you sort of you build the human cybernetic cyborg people, and you put them out onto the street, and that's a large part process. And I think I was still in a world where I'd done quite a lot of the development of the sponsors in Gaslands, and I had it in my head that one of the things I could offer was a sort of a quite involved, complex and rich structure of like team building, sort of army list development. And so I went off on one in this thing of the way that the cybernetic upgrades could work, and the way that they could integrate, and this process whereby it could be hidden from players which things were going to be developed for a research process, and each of the different syndicates could have a different research tree that overlapped with other syndicates, and had a way of sort of building it. And it was labyrinthine, wildly complicated, and came as an absolute dump of stuff.
Most importantly, actually, and maybe you don't perhaps remember this, most importantly, prior to writing that, you had fixated on a activation system involving different limbs and minor action points, and then you wrote all of that stuff, but like based on an activation system that you like, basically based on a version of the game that I didn't recognize and that I had never played, and didn't really understand whether or not was going to be right for the system, and frankly felt more granular and complicated than Mike Hutchinson designs tend to be. And so it was that both that it was a labyrinthine sort of dump, but that also it was one that I didn't recognize the origin for, and so I didn't have any way of computing. And so I think what the critical thing that we learned together from this experience was that I have like a kind of concentric circle process with the design, where the core of the game, the core mechanics have to become very, very clear to me before I start working on the next layer of the onions, whether that's like, the weapons and vehicles, or the campaign system broader than that. And partly there's an extremely practical reason for that, which is that you can spend a lot of time making very detailed systems for things like campaigns, which are like completely invalidated with a single minor change to the core rules. And so whilst the core rules are yet to be crystallized, working on these external onion layers is kind of it's problematic. It's basically highly likely to be a complete waste of time. And so what happened emotionally for me as part of this process was these additional layers appeared without my willing them, and I felt trapped by them because I didn't know how to it took away the ability for me to think about, free from constraints in a gravityless environment, what could the game be, what million directions could it go in, what core mechanics could exist to support those million directions. And it sort of tunnel visioned, it closed the like funnel of certainty in this really surprising kind of violent way, where it was like, no, this is the exact game and it shoots over in this direction. I was like, no, it's not. We're not at all. Like there's a classic design like double hourglass piece of sort of an initial expansion of ideas from your first core idea, like what are all of the ideas and all the possibilities and everything, and then you have to kind of whittle them down to a design, and then you start really working hard on making that design work, and you find lots of problems and these sort of things that you have to work on, and then you have to solve all those problems and you get to a final kind of shippable book. And I suppose like what the experience of working on Skulljacker sort of showed me in concrete terms was a couple things. One is this onion thing is really important, and stay away from the outer levels of the game design before, for me, stay away from the outer levels of the game design before the core is done. But also that it's really important for me to be able to think critically about my own games design before I open it up to collaborators. Or certainly, and maybe we haven't really talked about this for a while, but like in the game design phase, like concepting phase, I don't want to be thinking about development type questions about whether we're finessing it in this way or that way, because I want to be at still the big splashes of paint on the canvas, throw the canvas away, try some other big splashes.
Yeah. And I think the thing was that I was in this place where I was like, well, this is great fun. I'm having fun here. I'm writing a bunch of stuff. And then I gave it to you with the sort of attitude of, I know that there's a lot of stuff here, but to my mind, it's like, feel free to immediately just dump it into the shredder. You don't even read it if you don't want to. Just drop it straight in shredder. And I literally wouldn't have sort of lost, an hour's sleep over that. But we weren't in that place where I think we could both accept doing that. And I think also, again, coming immediately off of Gaslands, there was this place where I could drop that onto Gaslands, and it would be like, dropping it onto a Gaslands truck. It'd just be like, dump, truck's fine. With Skulljacker, it was like dropping, a copy of the entire works of Shakespeare onto a newly born baby, and you lifted it
or a little daisy.
Oh dearie me. And again, and having been through that process, I think,
and just I want to catch on that metaphor, gross though it was, because the design wasn't robust enough. It didn't know what it was. It didn't have enough defensive, like, I didn't know how to defend what was important because I didn't yet know what was important. And so like a truckload of new ideas collided with it. And I looked at the mess and just went, I don't know how to put these pieces back together again, because I don't know which pieces are important anymore.
I so sort of horrified you with this other and I think it's a lot of, it's like when they say, once you've seen this, you can't unsee it. I think the fact that I did a thing you couldn't unsee kind of killed that design for you in many ways, which is a real pity. And I think, since then, there have been various points where you've presented an idea, and I've now learned to be able to say, okay, is this the thing where you want me to say that looks cool and then walk away, or do you actually want me to start on it? And a few times you said, no, I just want to show a cool thing to my friend and have him say that looks cool, and then maybe in 6 months' time I'll have something that you can come at. And I've been able to go, and now we have that moment, and I can go, fine, that's great, I can put it out of my head.
And I think the corpse of Skulljacker, bloody though it is, like, it came just before or at the same time as working on A Billion Suns, and I'm 100% sure that A Billion Suns is a lot stronger as a result of the corpse of Skulljacker, because what it gave me real confidence is that, like, I was super unsure about the design of A Billion Suns. I didn't know whether it was going to be a big fleet battle sort of battle line game, or something very strategic, or was it going to be really objective based or really combat based. Like, it took me a long time to puzzle that out, and the experience on Skulljacker gave both of us this real, like, keen awareness of it needing to be a thing that I had long enough to kick the football around in my own back garden before I figured out roughly where I wanted, which elements I needed to defend and keep sacrosanct, and which elements were very much fungible and up for attack and development and dissection.
Yeah, and I would say I have in a drawer somewhere my A version of A Billion Guns and A version of Hobgoblin that I went away and wrote in order to not show them to you. Um,
I
yeah,
am super curious to read those.
I want to say, well, this is what I would do, and this is probably okay. Right, that's gotten that out.
Yes, yes, gentle reader. You can imagine the quill at work, and because he always worked in those days, always worked on bits of lined paper. The bits of lined paper spewing out left and right.
Yes. So yeah, and again, and I think a lot of it comes back to this thing of learning which bits of the game you need to fight for, and which bits of the game are up for grabs, and which fights to be willing to have, and which things that you're poking your friend in a soft spot and you probably shouldn't do it because you're not helping by achieving that.
Well, and also there's something that I think there's a really important distinction for me between, like, I believe very strongly that it's important to get a new game design on the table with other humans really early on, just to see whether the whole thing stands up, or whether in your mind it was going to do something, and actually when you plug all those things together it doesn't at all do that, or it's total garbage, or it doesn't even function, or it like falls over at the first sentence. And that, whilst important, is very different to the open invitation to start developing, for others to start developing it. Because if it's very much at the conceptual stage where you still are figuring out what the major moving parts are, it's important to show it to humans, but it isn't important to get any feedback necessarily, other than this is broken, try again, Mike.
Yes, so we had a conversation about the lovely and sort of immediately backslapping wonderfulness that was working on Gaslands. We've had a little chat about the abortive attempt at a collaboration that was Skulljacker. That's been another lovely conversation. I think we'll sign off for now. We'll come back with more sort of, I think, generalized conversations on collaboration and how to be a good part of each side of the conversation next. But for now, I think we'll sign off. If you've watched through to this point, please do like and subscribe. It really helps us to
all praise the algorithm.
Smash that like button. Yeah, please drop into the comment section if you have tried to collaborate. I know we asked people to sort of drop in their comments about failed collaborations on the last video, but particularly in this video, if you've attempted to collaborate and it broke down, let's take a moment to try and figure out possibly why that happened in the comments sections. Drop in why you think it didn't work.
Feel free to change the names of the innocents.
Yes. Where these things broke down, because sometimes it's just down to personality. Sometimes it's down to I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have worked in this way. And there are learning points to. And
sometimes it's just down to like tedious process points of like not knowing what your process is yet.
Yeah. I think, but for now, we'll sign off on this episode of Rule of Carnage. Look us up online, reach out to us on social media. But for now, it's going to be thank you and goodbye. So thank you and goodbye.
See you next week.